Welcome to Cigars, the Masterclass, Harvest. Privada Cigar Club presents. Tobacco isn't just a crop, it's a calling, rooted in the soil and shaped by the hands of generations. From the lush, sun-drenched fields of Pinar del Rio to the fertile valleys of the Dominican Republic and the rugged terrain of Nicaragua, each region tells a story in its leaves. This is no factory line production, it's ritual, a meticulous dance between man, earth, and time, where every seed planted is a promise and every leaf harvested is a testament to craft. Cigar tobacco is alive, evolving with the care it's giving. It's topped, suckered, and sun-kissed, watched over like a rebellious teenager finding its way. And yet, behind the bold, smoky flavor of a fine cigar lies a world most of us never see, and the delicate science of balancing nature with tradition. This is the story of how great cigars are born. Okay, y'all, so here we are. We're talking about the most important part of the process by far. You can't have cigars without the tobacco plant, and so many of us leave this step out sort of in our minds. And I do want to say this, if you ever get the honor to stumble upon a tobacco field at almost or near full maturity, it is sexy as hell. You have an experience where you walk up to these plants and you're like, wow. And for me, it happens every single time. It's not just the first time, but it's a beautiful plant. And you look at this thing and you say, wow, this is where this thing, this cigar that I love so much is coming from. And it's truly amazing. And so we're going to talk about the meticulous process of growing these plants. Let's start before the seed. We're talking about the soil. One of the things we did during the off season, after we harvested the last crop, was we grew things that help add nutrients back to the soil or create soil that's looser so that our root systems for the next planting or the next harvest will have an easier time sucking up those nutrients from the groundwater, okay, sucking up those nutrients from the soil and grow better, stronger, healthier plants. Some of the farms are advanced enough, and this is why I say that tobacco is by far the best it's ever been. Don't believe the hype. Don't listen to any of the old timers that sit there and tell you it used to be better than it. That is not true. Science has met tradition, and on farms like Mr. A.J. Fernandez's farm, where he's spent millions and millions of dollars getting up to date on the science and also keeping that Cuban tradition, there's a reason why we're getting some of the most flavorful tobacco, and that is it. And so let's talk about this. We grew things in the off season to help that soil either regenerate nutrients or loosen up so that it's ready for the next crop. Okay. Now we have these tiny microscopic seeds, which we talked about in the last episode of Cigars, the Masterclass seeds. And they're tiny. I mean, really tiny. And so we've created this space that's away from sunlight, but still outdoors. So it's kind of will feel like a hut, okay? And we've created all these rows, and we have multiple images from AJ's farm and from our friend's farm in Puerto Rico, where they're growing tobacco, in this case, for the first time in a very long time in Puerto Rico. And so we've got these seeds germinating. We all did this in probably elementary school, right? My kid just came home with a plant. You got these little cups, nutrient-dense potting soil. We put the seeds in there, and they start to hatch. The strong survive. They start to hatch. And this germination process takes about 15 days. Okay, from there, we have about 4 to 6 weeks to grow these plants strong enough and durable enough that they survive the transplant into the actual tobacco fields. Now, we have a couple of choices. Do we want to grow in the shade or do we want to grow in the sun? And these are things that we should think about. Typically, if I want to grow wrapper leaf, I'm probably better off growing that in the shade. Now, we've all heard of Connecticut shade leaf, which is grown in the shade. It's a type of seed. It produces a very yellow and handsome cigar wrapper, but not all tobacco that's grown under shade is Connecticut shade. Okay, so a lot of Habano leaf, if it's going to be wrapper leaf, it's grown in the shade. And so we had Hector Luis Prieto here, Diaz from Cuba, one of their finest growers. And this man has half his farm under shade and half of his farm outside in the sun. Why does he do that? Part of it's going to be the wrapper. The other part of it's for the flavor, the body, the strength. That's going to get it from that sun, right? Okay. So now we're growing a plant. We did the right thing in the off season. We use science now. Now in Cuba, I don't think that they're able to do this. And in a lot of farms, they're not able to do this because it does cost a lot of money. But they're not able to pump in those nutrients, at least not as easily as some of the bigger farms, okay? And so we've done the right thing in the off season. We've germinated our seeds. We've cared for them, made sure they're durable enough to transplant. We've put them in formation. Every farm has its own way of doing this. It could be a certain amount of feet. I've seen guys in Lancaster, they have a stick that goes between each plant on both sides, so they have room to pick. They're picking by hand. It's a back-breaking experience, but they've planted in their formation, and now these plants are growing. Now, if you're super scientific, you are testing that soil and testing that soil and testing that soil, and you're adjusting nutrients for the climate changes, which we're all dealing with, whether we want to believe it or not. Farmers know all about the climate is changing. What's causing that? Whole different topic. Okay, but climates are changing. There are, for instance, in France, there are grapes they can't even grow there anymore. Okay, so this is happening. We're adjusting. We're taking these plants and growing them to full maturity. Now, what's happening during this process is they start to sprout a flower. That flower is supposed to be cut off immediately. It's a circumcision of the tobacco plant. And they're cutting that off. Why are they cutting that off? They're cutting that off because they want the nutrients that would turn into those beautiful colors and seeds to go back into the leaves. And so that's called topping. There are rumors that they stopped doing this in Cuba. Someone I respect very much was down there. He said none of the plants were topped. He was pissed about it. Yeah, some farmers care, some don't. But for the most part, anyone growing tobacco is going to top their plant. Just depends when. Do they let it sprout a little bit, or do they get it out before they can? I don't know the name of that process. We could probably look it up. But it is called topping when you remove that flower. And if you see a plant on your farm that is growing bigger, stronger, faster than all the other plants, you might not top that plant. Why? Why? Because you want those seeds. It's showing signs of having amazing DNA. That's the plant you want to replicate next year. Okay? And so that happens too. So now we have our plants growing. The whole process, after the 4 to 6 weeks of getting that plant durable enough to put, once you get it into the ground in your farm, you have 90 to 120 days, and boy, tobacco grows fast. Depending on the strain, they say you can hear it grow. You can literally at night hear creaks and cracks. The stalks are growing. It's super amazing to watch, and it's super amazing to be around. And so we have these tobacco plants growing. And so let's talk about now, and we've all probably heard this, so I don't want to bore you too much with it, but the three main parts of the plant: seco, viso, and ligero. Now, there were times in histories past where the seco was prized leaf for a million different reasons. One of them is because it burns white, and people like that. And so they would try to use these as wrapper leaves. In more modern times, people feel like there's much less flavor in the seco, but there's a lot of combustibility. So they'll use it in the blend of a cigar for combustibility. Then we come up to the viso. This is the prized part of the plant. This is the middle. Okay, so during harvesting times, people might remove that bottom part, the seco. The seco, And also, it can be called velato in some areas too. So they want to remove that sometimes because they don't care about that. They don't want it. They want the more flavorful part of the plants and the less other objects you have growing on this plant. In other words, the leaves at the bottom, the flower at the top means the other leaves that are left are going to get all the nutrients that that plant's getting, creating more flavorful, robust tobacco. And that's very advantageous for a grower to have that great tobacco. So we have the Seco on the bottom, we have the Viso in the middle, and Seco, Viso, Ligero. And we have the Ligero at the top. The Ligero, what is it? It's the sun-grown top of the plant. It's sucked up a lot of nutrients from the sun. It also has a lot more chlorophyll, whereas those bottom leaves have less chlorophyll. Chlorophyll makes a less combustible product. We'll talk about how to get that out of there, but there is no way to get enough of it out as much as stuff grown in the shade. So that's also part of why a wrapper leaf is a wrapper leaf. It's grown in the shade. We want wrapper leaves grown in the shade, less chlorophyll, more combustibility, beautiful. The sun grown is going to have more spots on it possibly. It's just like skin. So when you are out in the sun all the time, you see what happens to your skin, but it also creates a lot of flavor. So those are going to be, the Ligero leaves are going to be in the middle of a cigar blend. They're harder to smoke, so you want to run that down the middle of your cigar so you get that nice cone-shaped burn. It's a beautiful thing, but let's get back to the plant. So we have these three parts of the plant. Let's say the plant is becoming fully mature. We topped our flower off, and now we want to remove those bottom leaves. And we'll put those away for something else because we want the middle and top part of the plant to get all the nutrients now to finish this thing off, okay? There are multiple different ways and traditions to harvest this plant. I'm telling you about priming right now. Priming means pulling certain parts of the plant off, which would start at the bottom and work your way up to the top. Okay, there are people who have tricks and tips and do it their own way. Who knows? But, I mean, I can think of some things right now that I might do differently. But let's remember how much work went into this. It's not time to play around and experiment. This is your cash crop. This is how you make a living. So we're probably going to stick to the game plan and do things the way they've always been done. We might prime by taking out of the bottom leaves first and work our way up to the top over the next few weeks. The difference can be weeks between when the parts of the plant are harvested. And then there's something called stock cutting. Stock cutting is when you not only pull you don't pull the leaves off of the plant, you pull the actual whole thing out by the root, okay? That is a stock cut, and that will produce a different effect. From what I understand, it can be thicker. It's really, I've only ever heard of it really being done with broadleaf, but I am not an expert in the actual farming process. I can only tell you what I've learned from being on the farms that I've been on and the studying and the homework that I do on this beautiful process. But the only time I've ever seen it actually advertised as stock cut is with Connecticut broadleaf. So it might be something that they do only in that region, and we can talk more about that in the future. But those are the ways that you can harvest the product. You can do priming or you can pull the whole thing out. Priming is pulling leaves off. Stock cut is pulling the whole thing out. From here, we're going to curing. We're going to talk about that in the next video. I think this video was long enough, but there's a lot here to cover, and this is by far the most important part of this process. Growing great tobacco that had optimal nutrients, optimal sunlight, or exposure, however you wanted it to a great climate. Let's put it that way. And this is where the magic happens. Because like I said, if you can create great tobacco, you don't have to be the best blender in the world. And we'll also talk about that later. So thank you for watching Cigars, the Masterclass Harvest. It is my honor to be here researching this and getting the real information out all in one place, probably for the first time. Thank you for watching. Privada Cigar Club presents